Humans have been proclaiming the existence of God for longer than we've been able to preserve these writings in monuments, preserve these ideas in monuments and writings. Even as nomads, we created permanent temporal monuments to which wandering people returned for tens of thousands of years. It appears natural for us to believe in something greater than ourselves, and many would argue that without a God to guide us, or to remind us of our humanity, or to help us reform it, that we're doomed to devolve into warring clans of power mongers and slaves. And yet, even as we're instinctively drawn into relationship with a conscious cosmos, throughout history, people who believe in a God of any sort are often deemed foolish or superstitious. Even the Jesus teacher Paul is called foolish for proclaiming God has started a new age, even though he was living in a culture that believed in the God's daily supernatural intervention. For some reason, these same superstitious people who believed killing a dove would encourage Jupiter to bring the rains, they berate Paul for preaching Jesus' resurrection as the sign of the beginning of the end of our corrupt human systems. Foolishness is funny that way, I suppose. You can sense Paul's frustration at the irony of his situation in his first letter to the church in Corinth. Corinth was a wealthy Roman colony and a very important trading hub. After Julius Caesar seeded the metropolis with merchants, freed slaves, and immigrants striving for upward mobility, Corinth quickly became known around the ancient world as Sin City. This is a true story. There's a Vegas for every generation, I guess. So, a treacherous nest of thieves, charlatans, and opportunists Corinth may have been, but it also had the virtue of being one of the most religiously diverse colonies in the empire. There is archaeological evidence that shows the imperial Roman cult and Egyptian, Greek, Jewish, and other religious temples coexisted and thrived in Corinth. So, there were a lot of choices for someone interested in religion. We know from Paul's letters that ideas from these other religions were creeping into Paul's teaching. So he attempts to stop the syncretic spread by reminding the church that all those other religions and all of those other religious ideas pale in comparison to the action that God took through Jesus on the cross. Now, whether or not we agree with Paul's conclusions about Jesus, his passion and zeal about looking past both superstition and intellectualism to transcendence still stir my soul today. Here's what Paul wrote in his first letter to the church in Corinth. For Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, not with wisdom and eloquence, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. Where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. Jews demand signs and Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles, but to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. Part of the reason we create religions is to provide society with a sense of morality. Now, religions have historically done a horrifying job of living up to the standard they impose on others, but that's because ordinary people comprise religions and people mess up. Still, it's inarguable that for millennia, religions have provided humanity with at least the ideal of what a moral life looks like. That's why nearly 2,000 years ago, Paul is so upset that in Sin City, his new flock is losing its way. Like most reverent Jews of his era, I imagine Paul might have turned to the Psalms and read, "Fools say in their hearts there is no God. They are corrupt and do evil things. Not one of them does anything good. The Lord looks down from heaven on humans to see if anyone is wise, to see if anyone seeks God, but all of them have turned bad. Everyone is corrupt. No one does good, not even one person. Are they dumb, all these evildoers, devouring my people like they're eating bread but never calling on the Lord? Count on it. They will be in utter panic because God is with the righteous generation. You evildoers may humiliate the plans of those who suffer, but the Lord is their refuge." Well, like Paul, I often read the Psalms when I'm frustrated with the world because the psalmists typically and somewhat uncannily express my feelings with excruciating insight. I mean, be honest. How many times lately have you asked yourself, are they dumb? Is everyone corrupt? I probably do it about 30 times a day. Our human tendency toward idiocy has been an issue for thousands of years. I mean, Psalm 14 was written at least 3,000 years ago and reveals that people in the ancient world were as fed up with the corruption of human socioeconomic and political structures as we are today. The more things change, the more humans stay the same, I guess. But pay attention to what the psalmist says. No one does good, not even one person. Our psalmist claims, hyperbolically of course, accusing every person in the society of being corrupt, dumb, and foolish. So the author can really make their real point. Because people have forgotten God's wisdom, grace, forgiveness, and love, the society is shirking its covenant duty to honor and care for one another, especially those on the fringes. Psalm 14 considers that God might as well be dead since nobody's paying attention anyway. It's astonishing to proclaim 3 millennia ago that the entire world is evil because God is dead and we killed him. Toward the dawn of the 20th century, the German polymath Friedrich Nietzsche came to a similar conclusion about the state of humanity. In The Gay Science, he wrote, "God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it?" Nietzsche was commenting on what he saw as an unintended consequence of the Enlightenment, the complete secularization of society, especially Europe. The problem was that these societies were no longer basing their infrastructure or their attitudes on the moral teachings of the Catholic Church. Secularization caused a reform of European civil ethics, which could no longer be grounded in either the Catholic fear of eternal damnation or the Jewish ideal of a universal covenant. If the author of the Psalms met Nietzsche for an espresso in the Afterworld Cafe, neither would be surprised at the other's idea that without a transcendent, centralized moral authority, society devolves into the power-driven politics of greed. Our ancient psalmist and Nietzsche agree. Without a divine moral construct, without some image of a universal power that can create planets and stars and galaxies and people, without something that gets us out of our own backyards, we behave like power-hungry fools while society devolves into skirmishes between warlords over resource control. And without a moral center, why wouldn't we devolve? After all, both authors ask, if there's no God, what's the point of acting well, much less sacrificing our personal desires for the common good. Today, people ask the same question, only they phrase it this way. Why should I pay taxes to support Social Security and universal health care and free education for other people? Or in this COVID-infected era, people ask, why should I wear a mask? And pompously exclaim, you can't make me, I have rights. And they're correct. They do have rights, and we cannot make them wear a mask. We cannot force someone to care about others. I cannot, nor would I, force anyone to do anything. I can, however, remind these anti-vaxxing, anti-masking people, the vast majority of whom proclaim to be believers in God and followers of Jesus, and all of whom represent the general attitude of the United States. I can remind them that God insists we sacrifice for the common good. If you claim to believe in Jesus, you must believe that. We can argue about all sorts of other Christian beliefs and Christian ideals, but to proclaim any sort of faith or following in Jesus, we must fundamentally believe in sacrifice for the common good. It's foolishness, I know. I'm not suggesting that the evils of the world will disappear tomorrow if we all started believing in God, whatever God means in our pluralistic, post-Christian, postmodern world. But I know God never works against people trying to take care of each other. Although he wasn't religious later in life, Nietzsche was concerned that the collapse of the church as Europe's centralized moral authority would lead to a complete loss of meaning in modern society. Eventually, he thought civilizations would be governed solely by what he called the will to power. Well, if Nietzsche is right, and it has become too difficult for people to believe in any concept of God as a moral authority, if we can't or won't believe in a covenantal, duty-bound relationship to love one another through the conscious universe, then can we at least agree that we are all in this existence together? We're all in the same swimming pool, folks. If one of us pees, we all suffer the consequences. So people, can we please, for God's sake, stop peeing in the swimming pool? I happen to agree with our Jewish predecessors like Jesus, who insist the world and everything on it belong to God, and that we're just here to take care of it. That includes caring for each other. And we are not doing either job responsibly. We are fools for no longer believing in something, anything more significant than ourselves. We're so full of hubris, so puffed up by our sense of godliness because we can splice genes and create life forms and program RNA that we're burning the world to the ground while we dance and fiddle like Emperor Nero in ancient Rome. And it is Rome looming, foreshadowing powers corrupting nihilism. If we want to break the eternal cycle of civilization's rise and fall, we must refocus on both our individual and communal priorities to love and care for one another. The wisdom to do so is found in loving unconditionally, boldly, foolishly even. Love reveals that the secret of the universe is simply more love, that all creatures, great and small, desire merely to love and be loved in return. Maybe we could make some progress toward God's realm of cooperation and social equitability if we start calling God love instead of God. If we believe in God, people are still going to accuse us of foolishly believing in the supernatural, even if we think God is the most natural thing in the universe. But if we say we believe in love, well, they can still call us fools, I suppose, but who among us hasn't been a fool for love? Amen.